For decades, the United States presented itself as the guardian of liberty, yet beneath that veneer, a clandestine laboratory was forging weapons of the mind. The CIA, intent on outmaneuvering Soviet intelligence, authorized a program that turned hospitals and university labs into testing grounds for unknowing citizens, benefiting an agency whose power grew each secret it kept hidden. It matters today because the very mechanisms that allowed those experiments to flourish still shape how the state can reach into private consciousness. Project MKUltra was not a single decision, but a system, one that normalized covert funding and unchecked authority in the name of Cold War security. In 1953, Director Allen Dulles signed off on a budget line hidden from Congress, directing the agency's Office of Scientific Intelligence to recruit psychologists, psychiatrists, and chemists willing to explore the boundaries of human perception. The money arrived through black appropriations, untraceable in ordinary audits, allowing researchers at institutions like Harvard and Stanford to receive grants without answering to any civilian board. Those early contracts sowed the roots of a network that would soon blur the line between medical care and espionage. The first experiments were framed as cutting-edge neuroscience. Researchers obtained LSD, then a newly synthesized compound, under the pretense of studying its therapeutic potential for alcoholism and depression. In reality, the drug became a tool to dissolve ordinary cognition, making subjects pliable to suggestion. Hospitals that had earned public trust, psychiatric wards in New York, community clinics in California, were quietly supplied with vials labeled research chemicals. Patients arrived for routine appointments, unaware they were being dosed with hallucinogens or sedatives. Some were given subtherapeutic amounts, others received enough to plunge them into vivid, uncontrollable visions. The CIA also funded studies of hypnosis and sensory deprivation tanks, hoping that a combination of chemical and environmental stress could erase resistance entirely. In these settings, the agency's presence was invisible. A grant number on a ledger, a phone call from an unmarked office, a promise of national security whispered in corridors that should have protected healing. When the chemicals took hold, the true ambition of MKUltra emerged. Subjects were placed in dark rooms, where lights flickered at irregular intervals, their ears filled with low-frequency hums designed to disorient. Some were strapped into restraint chairs, while technicians recorded every twitch, every gasp, every fragment of memory that resurfaced after a dose. The goal was not merely to observe a drug's effect, but to engineer a state of mental breakdown from which new, compliant identities could be built. Victims described losing hours, sometimes days, of recall. They emerged with gaps that could not be explained by ordinary amnesia. In some cases, the program attempted memory erasure through repeated administration of sedatives followed by suggestive questioning, hoping to rewrite personal narratives. The ethical breach was total. Physicians breached their oath, researchers abandoned informed consent, and a government agency sanctioned these violations under the banner of intelligence gathering. Though the details remain fragmentary, most files were shredded in 1973. The pattern of abuse is unmistakable. By the late 1960s, rumors began to surface. A junior analyst at a university lab, troubled by the disappearance of patients after experimental sessions, leaked a memorandum to an investigative journalist. The note referenced Project MKUltra and listed several hospitals receiving unaccounted shipments of psychoactive substances. Newspapers ran brief stories about secret drug trials, but without concrete names, the public could not grasp the scope. Inside Washington, low-level clerks whispered in coffee rooms, noting that budget line items for behavioral research were unusually large and lacked justification. The CIA's internal security unit warned operatives to destroy any paper trails, yet a few brave insiders kept copies of memos, believing the truth should not be buried forever. These fragments formed a mosaic that hinted at a systematic abuse of power, but it would take a formal inquiry to bring them into full view. The turning point arrived in 1975, when the Senate's Church Committee opened hearings on intelligence abuses. Senators demanded testimony from CIA officials, and former hospital administrators were subpoenaed to explain the unexplained drug deliveries. As witnesses described the covert nature of MKUltra, its secret appropriations, its recruitment of civilian scientists, its disregard for consent, the nation finally heard a coherent narrative of institutional overreach. In response, CIA Director William Colby ordered the destruction of remaining files, burning boxes that still contained subject lists and experimental protocols. The agency claimed that the program had been terminated years earlier, that any surviving records were redundant. Yet the hearings forced an acknowledgement. The United States had sanctioned a domestic mind control project, violating both constitutional protections and medical ethics. Congressional mandates for greater oversight followed, establishing permanent committees tasked with monitoring covert operations. For those who survived, the aftermath was a lifetime of psychological scars. Former subjects formed advocacy groups, demanding acknowledgement, compensation, and an official apology. They filed lawsuits against the government, citing violations of the Fourth Amendment and the right to bodily integrity. Though many cases were dismissed on grounds of national security, public pressure led the ACLU to file amicus briefs, arguing that secrecy could not shield systemic abuse. Survivors gathered in community centers, sharing stories of lost memories, chronic anxiety, and distrust of medical professionals. Their testimonies humanized a program that had been reduced to bureaucratic jargon in hearings. The movement succeeded in prompting the CIA to release a limited set of declassified documents in the 1990s, a thin slice of an otherwise erased archive, but the victims' pleas underscored a lingering injustice. Truth, once buried, leaves wounds that never fully heal. When the released files finally arrived, they revealed only fragments. Budget spreadsheets showing psychic research allocations, correspondence with Dr. Sidney Gottlieb, head of the CIA's Technical Services Division, and a handful of experiment logs noting dosages and observed effects. Crucially, the documents were heavily redacted. Names of subjects, specific hospitals, and detailed methodologies remained blacked out. The pattern that emerged confirmed earlier allegations, a coordinated effort to weaponize mind-altering substances conducted across dozens of civilian institutions under covert funding. The absence of comprehensive records forces historians to piece together the story from secondary sources, court testimonies, journalist investigations, and personal memoirs. This patchwork underscores a deliberate erasure. By destroying files, the agency ensured that future generations would confront an incomplete picture, making accountability more elusive. Yet even these partial disclosures have shaped public understanding of governmental overreach, reinforcing calls for transparency in intelligence work. Today, debates about surveillance, data privacy, and psychological manipulation echo the lessons of MKUltra. Lawmakers cite the program when arguing against unchecked executive power. Civil liberties groups reference it to warn against behavioral targeting by tech companies. The specter of a hidden laboratory that once dosed citizens without consent serves as a cautionary benchmark for any policy that seeks to shape thought in secret. The story of MKUltra reminds us that the mechanisms which enabled a clandestine mind control project are not confined to the past. Covert appropriations, insulated oversight committees, and a culture that privileges security over individual rights can reappear under new guises. As we navigate an era of algorithmic influence and biometric monitoring, the suppressed shadows of history compel us to ask, what boundaries will we defend, and which secrets are we willing to let remain hidden?